Hey there! How are y'all doing? This is Chris McCauley, and today I'm going to be reviewing the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street, the original, the version from 1984. It starred Robert Englund as Fred Krueger. Traditionally we think of Freddy Krueger, but in this first movie, he's just known as Fred. And also, this is the movie where the strange credits introducing Johnny Depp come into play. Now, that being said, it's been 32 years at the time of this filming that we've seen Nightmare on Elm Street come to fruition. So, times change. And also, Heather Langenkamp is in this movie. Now, she doesn't have quite the track record that Johnny Depp has, but, she kept being used for more of the movies in this series than Depp did, so I guess that's something. And this starts off relatively tame. I mean, you get a sheep running in the hallway. You get this girl in a nightgown, a blue one. Not Heather Langenkamp, mind you, but nonetheless, she's walking around, hanging out, being cool, and the next thing you know, Freddy scares the shit out of her. And then she wakes up, and she realizes it's just a nightmare. Or is it? But for now, it's just a nightmare. And the real horror comes at the door when her mom comes up with her sleazy fuck toy, her boyfriend, and she exhibits anxiety as to why this girl named Tina in this case, why this girl is freaking out. What does she have to be scared of? It's not like some child murderer is gonna come out and, reap his harvest. Anyway, the boyfriend of Tina's mom is pretty pissed because he's ready to get shagging. I guess, because it's the 80s. Shagging's still not terribly dated as it is these days. But I don't know. When I hear shagging, I think of Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. But I guess that's a little older than that. But what's the point? The point is he's in the mood to get it on, and that's pretty timeless. Anyway, after that, she goes to school the next day. Tina does, and she's with Heather Langenkamp and Johnny Depp. Yes, they are her friends, better known as Nancy and Glenn. And Tina asks about, what could this all mean? This is spooky as all get out. And hey, my nightgown got torn in the process, and it was torn in the dream. So how did that happen? And Tina's boyfriend comes up, and you can tell he's a bit of a prick. He looks like he was straight out of one of the Grease movies, with his big old leather jacket and his whole "Hey, what's going on?" So that happens, and then after that, you can just kind of tell he's kind of a dick, but. Well, we're not at the time yet that we're in pure stereotypes. We're still in stereotype land, but we're not quite so inhumane as to give him no character whatsoever outside of being a greaser. So anyway, they go to school after Tina thinks it's an earthquake, which I can't imagine. I think it would make more sense if they were playing up where this film was being filmed. In California, even though it was set in Ohio, and I'll tell you right now, I'm from Ohio, and, well, Ohio is not prone to as many earthquakes as California. Yeah. So they go to school, and, yeah, it's not terribly informative. They hang out later that night, Tina, Glenn, and Nancy. And, you can tell this is the 80s now because they've got some over-the-top stereo and some cassette with a recording that like his brother made for him around the area, and Glenn's trying to call his mom. And this is about the time where I'm thinking, it's kind of weird that Glenn's this jock character. Probably more weird because time has passed and we've seen Johnny Depp do some freaky shit, but what do I know? So anyway, they're doing all this recording and stuff, and Tina and Nancy are just having the time of their life, just laughing at Glenn's sorry ass as he has to make up an excuse for his sleepover. So yeah, that happens. And then Tina, being all paranoid and shit, hears something outside, and Glenn, trying to be the tough greaser that he wasn't written to be, looks out and says, "Oh, I don't know." And he quite literally does a shrug, which it's hard to say. Hard to say anything else about that. And then, Mr. Greaser comes in and tackles the shit out of them and makes it a jump scare. So, and eventually I'll give this film my rating of sorts. But, truthfully, jump scares were still a thing even back then too. And as weird as it say the 80s are back then, I'll tell you right now, I wasn't even alive in 84. So, yeah, it's been a while. Yeah. So, anyhow, after jump scare, Greaser comes in, and he wants to get the shagging too, except, he pulls it off a little more than the boyfriend of Tina's mother. I guess Tina's family is all about greasers and shagging, isn't it? Anywho, Tina, of course, has the ironic line of, "Don't let him hurt me," which at the time doesn't seem that bad of a line, but it's a Freddy Krueger movie. Well, Fred in this case, but it's a Freddy Krueger movie, so you have a pretty good idea where this is heading. So yeah, they're boning. They're they're moving forward with things, and Glenn is sad because he's not moving forward with things of that nature. Nancy's got that instinct of I want to be a survivor today, so maybe I shouldn't get it on. That was kind of a thing, and it still is. It was a little more creatively drawn in this movie than other movies of recent, but anyway, then comes one of the most infamous scenes anyway, where Tina comes outside where Fred Krueger is, and she sees him for what he really is. I mean, a more scarier approach this time, because instead of being in a boiler room now, she's actually in his domain. So, this time, he comes into her domain, and you see all these trash cans and all this lid that just flies around and fucks around, and it's one of those things where, while it doesn't really happen like that, it's pretty cool, and I'll take it. So yeah, so Mr. Krueger pretty much mauls the shit out of her, except this is the scene where homegirl flies around all around the bedroom, and Greaser is just like, what is going on? You'd think he was tripping stuff, but no, Freddy Krueger's enough of a trip, so you don't need the vacation any further. So yeah, Freddy uses his finger knives, and Tina's no mas. But Mr. Greaser and his tighty-whitey, he gets knocked out in the process because he tries to turn the light on, and he and he fails, and yeah, and he gets a little bit of a shock from the lamp as he tries to unplug it. That'll happen to you. And of course the room is locked from the inside, so you can't really have Nancy or Glenn bust in, make things any better. No, you really can't. You know, by that time, Glenn's the one that gets his hands around the door, along with a mix of Nancy and Glenn busting ass and trying to get in, that kind of thing. And, well, we see a lot of blood. A lot of blood. I mean, you know, for that time. It's still a fair amount now, but it's relatively muted. I'm indifferent on how I feel about that one. So yeah, moving forward, if we hadn't realized already, Nancy's dad happens to be a cop. And actually a pretty smart cop too. Now, horror movies and cops, well, you know, they're one of three kinds. Either non-existent, stupid as shit, or jackasses. And this one's more of a jackass with like a slight leniency of, you know, you see the father, and there's actual growth that happens in this movie. I think that's one thing that I gotta give this movie credit for, that there is actual growth with the characters. I mean, even with Mr. Greaser, who seems like he's about as stereotypical as you can get. And you know what? His heart softens a little bit. You know? Maybe he needed his girlfriend mauled to get him to have a little more charm. And then, of course, you know, he gets destroyed later, but you can't win everything. So, yeah. Anyway, Greaser is accused of the murder, and, well, the police are not privy to the sights that we saw with the nightmares happening, so, yeah, the police have pretty much the right to do that. I think one of the funniest lines is when Nancy's dad sets up Nancy and Greaser to run into each other, and the line is, "What the hell are you going to school for anyway?" To Nancy. And that's a hard one to not laugh at, because, well, I think one aspect of trying to move on is trying to go back to normal life and not let the events of the recent past affect you negatively, you know? You should learn from the past, but you generally want to move things forward. Yeah. So, while Nancy's trying to move things forward, she, of course, falls asleep in class. And if you haven't known the anthem of this movie, it's "Don't fall asleep." So, yeah, probably not the best idea there, Nancy. Of course she learns this later, but moving on. So she's in class, and she falls asleep, and she sees Tina in like one of those, I'm probably gonna sound relatively stupid, but one of those body bags, alright, and Tina's arm like comes and like caresses the body bag, and she's like, Nancy, and it's really not that funny, but you know, after you get muted, after your senses get neutered in a way, you start to find things funny that originally were scary as all get out. Anyway, Tina moves on, and Nancy follows her out the hallway, and this woman, who is a manifestation of both the Nancy's teacher and Mr. Krueger, who yells with the claw, "Hey! No running in the hallway." And Nancy's like, what the fuck? And I'd be like, what the fuck too, because, hi, there are a ton of leaves in this school. And not just like 3 or 4 leaves that just kind of trickled in on their way from someone's foot. No, I'm talking probably literally thousands of leaves just in this damn cluster in the hallway. And they don't even start from the front doors of the school. So yeah, Nancy, it's not real. Well, not right now anyway. So Nancy follows Tina into the boiler room. I mean, this is like if you're going to New York City and you have the subway station, but instead of a subway station, it's the boiler room of Mr. Fred or Freddy Krueger. And this is the first time where Nancy meets this fucker, and she isn't too happy with him. She's had these nightmares about him for a while too, and she was a bit skeptical all along the way, but as Tina was talking about it, and even as Glenn recounted the knives for fingers, Nancy started to realize this is pretty spooky. And Mr. Krueger is an ass. Yeah. So in her fit of trying to get out of this horrid dream, she puts her arm against a burning pipe, essentially, a steaming hot pipe. And she's moving her head around, going in all sorts of different directions there. And she wakes up finally, but you can see on her left arm, you can see the burn. So, you know it's real. She decides to go home, and of course the teacher makes a quip that relates to the dream. You know, you feel like it was meant to be. Nancy goes home. She talks to her mom. Her mom, I thought I knew what an alcoholic was. And then I met this mother, and I realized I have a long way to go before I ever get to that status. I mean, this mother has probably about 6 different bottles of liquor. Just throughout this entire house. It's as if she wanted to play a game of hide and seek with her children, except she thought these bottles were her kids. And so she just stuck them in different places, and then snapped into her psychosis and said, "Where'd my kids go?" And then periodically she'd just find one. I think one of the funniest times of these interactions is when, this is towards the beginning of them, when Nancy is talking to her mother, and her mother is stressed out because she has a secret that we haven't heard yet. But you can tell it's looming. It's gonna come up. It's gonna be a matter of discussion here. And Nancy's mother talks about how, you know, Nancy should, I don't know, try to get some sleep. And Nancy just looks at her, and her hair's been graying at this point, and she just takes the bottle and yells, "Screw sleep!" And then drops it. Just drops it. And it shatters. And I gotta say, that is one big mess to clean up. It's quite a mess. It's a pretty sticky situation. Now, of course, the secret is, and it's not a secret anymore, but it's been 32 years. I think someone busted it by now, besides me. Was that Nancy's mother was involved in the murder of Mr. Krueger. Yes, Mr. Krueger technically isn't alive in his original form. No, no. He was a child murderer who got free on some loophole, some bureaucratic thing of where we know his ass did it, but they didn't get the paperwork signed in the right spots. I'm sure I would love to be around that person. So anyway, they destroyed the shit out of him, and they torched his place, and yeah, he burned to a crisp. And it just so happened that through some freak thing, and this is where it gets a little hazy. You know, now he comes back as the essence of coming into teenagers' dreams and murdering them in their sleep. You can't escape. So you can tell Nancy's mother's been tortured, and for legitimate reasons, but you're still pissed that homegirl withheld that information from her daughter that's been experiencing her friends getting slaughtered. You know, kind of nice to know why. What Mr. Krueger's so mad about would help. So, after their lengthy discussion, and after Nancy's downward spiral into insanity, and then mega insanity, you see that Nancy's mother takes Nancy to a sleep clinic. They try to analyze her dreams. Things get spooky there too, because she manages to pull out Mr. Krueger's hat. And this is where I should mention, this is the time when the secret of Nancy's mother gets revealed, because Nancy pulls out the hat at this point. And it even has his name on it. Fred Krueger! And that's where the entire conversation of screw sleep and bottle number 1 out of 6 and Nancy's mother off her fucking rocker come into play. So then it comes about, some more time passes, another nightmare or two occurs. You see Nancy has a fuck ton of coffee and pills literally called stay awake pills. Yeah. She really wants to get to sleep soon. Nancy then comes into action by soliciting Glenn, and then if I haven't mentioned already, Nancy and Glenn are dating. They're together. And she gets Glenn to help her out, to watch her as she sleeps. You know, in the non-creepy way of, you're my boyfriend. I'm going into dreamland, into, I guess, Inception of sorts, you know, much long before Inception. So, Glenn is supposedly watching her, and he even says, yeah, I'm good. And she goes on her merry way. And she encounters Mr. Krueger. And she's struggling, but Glenn doesn't seem to be around. Nancy thankfully has the resourcefulness to wake herself up, has a backup alarm just in case Glenn's sorry ass didn't do anything. And it turned out Glenn broke the one rule of don't fall asleep. So Nancy's pretty pissed. And then you start to notice that Nancy's mother really loses her shit and just puts bars on the windows, because she put it together that Glenn kept sneaking up to Nancy's room. Or, you know, maybe she just knew it the whole time. Maybe she just didn't give a shit before, and she just snapped. That's probably it. So, Glenn can't climb up there anymore. They're in their own houses. They happen to live across the street. That is one hell of a convenience, by the way. Having your boy toy live across the street. Either they picked an impeccable house to move into, and it just happened to be nearby, or they were neighbors all this time, and finally realized, kind of like that person, and they got together. So they're across the street now, and you can tell that Glenn's parents, for the 5 minutes that they're in this movie, are pretty fed up with Nancy. They think she's wacko. Well, the mother thinks just needs help in a more soft way, and the dad's just like, oh, blah, 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 blah. I'm a grumpy old man. Really though, I can't hear any of his dialogue without hearing someone go whoa, 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 or anything else really. The only thing that really saves him from the completely grumpy old man is the fact that his hair is not really that gray, and even then, he could have easily just had it a little bit colored, and he'd still be a grumpy old man. And either way, he's grumpy for sure. So he ends up putting the phone on outside of the holder, which in other words meets any calls coming in useless, because this is 1984 after all, and cell phones are a joke, and you got personal lines, but you sure as hell don't have your own phone that you can just walk around and take with you. And that is one thing that changes this movie. You know, how do they connect, and how do they have time of disconnection? And in fact, one of the gags that comes around this time is where Freddy has the "I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy," and this is where the phone's not even plugged in, you know, because that actually worked at that time, because you had to have the phone plugged in, and it wasn't. And not only was Freddy talking on this phone, but he has this his mouth on the receiver, literally. You know, the receiver end, instead of having the end of the phone, has his mouth and his burned face trying to lick him some Nancy. So that's a thing. And then after of course the phone to Glenn's house is taken off the line, you know Glenn is screwed, because you see at this point that Glenn's really had the fabric of Nancy, and that he's not much of a go-getter. His crop top doesn't think very highly of him either. The crop top didn't even want to cover him all the way. Wasn't willing to go the extra mile. Then of course comes the infamous getting sucked into a bed scene. Because Glenn's watching this big-ass computer TV thing, and he tells his mom in a quick quip that it doesn't matter what Miss Nude America is saying. I mean, you're watching Miss Nude America. If you want to know how American women have all their pageant aspects and have things to say, you watch Miss America. You don't watch Miss Nude America to hear the model say anything. And so it's sad but true that that Glenn or Mr. Depp was just like, why would I hear them say anything? And of course, this is 1984, so his mother is just like, ugh, you know, with that look of boys will be boys, and where if anyone tried to say that today, good luck. So anyway, he's watching Miss Nude America. He falls asleep, of course. And he's got everything sucked in to the bed with him. Including, like, his TV, his stereo, his headphones. All of that stuff gets sucked in. And then the blood spits back out onto the ceiling. Which, again, this is one of those... practicality, no. Awesomeness, yes. And also... this is about a child murderer who murders teenagers in their dreams. I don't think everything needs to be realistic. Just a thought. So, as it's been referenced more than a couple of times now, Nancy goes all home alone on Freddy Krueger's ass. You know, setting up booby traps that she read in a book. And there is a scene that talks about this book, so it's not totally out of nowhere. She's just putting it to good use. And she does end up trapping Mr. Krueger. And through a very, very elaborate scheme of sorts, this is where the climax comes in. Because now even Glenn is dead, and in between Tina and Glenn dying, Greaser died too, because, you know, Greaser was hung by Mr. Krueger while he was asleep. Because he had knives for fingers. So Nancy comes in, raging hell, and you know she's pissed. I would be pretty pissed too. I can't really argue with her in that one. So, they build up this climax. They have some pretty cool stunts. I particularly like where the stairs, they're a bit like quicksand in the fact of when you step into them, you can't really step out of them. You're able to, but it takes about 3 times as much time to move up a flight of stairs. And that's a pretty big impediment to moving around the house. So they go through this scene. You know, Mr. Krueger gets lit on fire. Not the first time. And he's pretty angry, and he wants Nancy dead. He also wants revenge on the parents. That's part of his wanting the teenagers dead. He wants the kids dead of the parents who did it. I think that's the real story behind Fred Krueger's madness. So, she gets out, Nancy does. Finally, after getting her dad and the other sheriff called over. I guess it's a pretty small town in Ohio. Not too shocking, really. Once they finally come together, they hear Mr. Freddy Krueger, going at it. But wait, who's he going after? What's going on here? Turns out, the mother is getting murdered in her sleep now. Not only murdered, but Freddy Krueger straight up takes her, like, out of this world. And I do mean that in a literal sense. Because the bed opens up, and you see Nancy's mother and her body kind of looking more corpsey, and she just floats down into the abyss of the open bed, and the bed gets sealed, and Nancy yells, "Mother! Mother!" And she's not coming back. Or is she? Well, after Nancy and her father, the sheriff, finally agree that this was in fact the fault of Mr. Freddy Krueger. Turns out Fred's got a trick up his sleeve. After her dad goes downstairs, Freddy Krueger comes back and gets close to tackling Nancy. And Nancy goes and says, "You're nothing. You're shit." Or something along that line. And as he reaches his claw to slice her up, he disappears into the abyss. And then she opens the door, and this ending that, when I first saw it, I was confused by it first. I was very confused, because at this point, I wasn't looking at movies very critically. And this is only about 2.5 years ago, so maybe I've learned a thing or two since then. But, anyway, she opens the door, and it's all sunlight, and now after a few viewings, I get it more, because you see it's all white, and you're just like, oh, this is like heaven, isn't it? Right? So she goes outside and she sees all of her friends in the car, and that's probably the first clue. You're like, wait, aren't they dead? Maybe not. Maybe it's all reversed. Then you notice that the car, and Glenn's driving out of all people. I've never seen Glenn drive the car until now, but okay. That's cool. You notice that the roof kind of slams on them and it's got the red and green stripes. Now, one thing I hadn't mentioned, but it's probably well known nowadays, is that Freddy Krueger has a red and green sweater. And the stripes of this convertible, that's what I'm going to call it, because it has the retractable roof. I'm just going to call it that. It has the stripes, and you're like, oh, how does this play in? Then you see that the windows roll up and that they're trapped inside and like hotbox starts to happen. And the mother's just standing out there. And this is after, by the way, she's proclaimed that I just don't feel like it to her drinking. Which, like I said before, Homegirl had 6 bottles just hanging out, you know. 1 in a fucking pillowcase. 1 in the closet. Yeah, she just pulls 1 out of the closet right after Nancy shatters 1. What in the world? So she's standing there, cheerful as hell. And then Freddy Krueger smashes through the window with his claw. And then takes Nancy's mother into his lair. And while it's been debated, of course, that no one can really fit through that small of a glass window, I say, once again, it looked cool. So I'll allow it. Now, this was my review of A Nightmare on Elm Street, and I had a lot of fun doing this, and eventually I will write scripts and write more videos, but this one was honestly all put together spur of the moment, and I'm sorry there's no clips right now. I will be working on more of these skills. I am excited to be making content, and I hope y'all had a blast, and I hope you had fun too. Alright. Have a good day. Bye.